never happen again. And we also want to see election reform so that we can believe results when we see it in the future.
Gary Abernathy, can you remind us what the committee is that our listener was talking about there?
Well, the January 6th committee is looking into what led to the insurgency, the riot, whatever word you want to assign to it, on January 6th, and they have subpoena power and so on. And they've been examining this. I do agree that there's a problem with trying to. I worry they're looking into what led to the protest, the peaceful gathering that happened that day, which is fine, whether you agree with what people want to gather together and protest or not. We support in America the right to do that. And so we shouldn't criminalize that. It's interesting, James, the Washington Post last month looked into all the charges that have been brought against the hundreds of people who have been federally charged for invading the Capitol for the riot. And they found that the vast majority of them were not connected to any grand conspiracy. They were not members of any right-wing groups like the Proud Boys or something. They were just normal, as the Post described them, business people and yoga instructors and so on, who just got caught up in this. So I worry about. I think Donald Trump should be held politically accountable for what happened. I doubt they're going to have any evidence to tie him to it for any kind of legal charges or criminality.
And of course, on political accountability, he was impeached for his role on the first of what happened last year in Congress after he left office. We've also got a written message, which we received from Bobby, a Republican living in Florida. Gary, let me quote you the message. The FBI, Bobby says, are the ones who created the, in quote marks, riot. Conservatives do not and will not riot. Those who went into the Capitol to create havoc were folks dressed up as Trump supporters. They went there with the purpose of creating a problem. We have an election this year, and people will be watching very closely at the polling stations so they don't cheat this time. So, Gary, you were talking about those who believe in conspiracy theories. This is, I think, what Bobby's referring to.
Yes, right, exactly.
And when you have a conversation with someone like Bobby, and Bobby, I don't know if you're listening, but Gary, if you were to address Bobby, who believes that this was a false flag operation, the FBI was responsible for dressing up, what would you say?
Well, that's pretty far out there. I would say, Bobby, look at the facts, look at the investigation. We're the Republican Party is the party that supports law enforcement. Let's remember that. They've looked into this. This was not false flag. These were legitimate Trump supporters doing that. But on the other hand, Republican Party shouldn't be too afraid to admit what happened. The polls right now, James, show that the Republican Party is in for a good election this November if things don't change drastically. So the party is well positioned. It can acknowledge reality. It can distance itself from Donald Trump and still embrace a lot of what Trump stood for, still embrace a lot of Trumpism, just without Trump.
You see, you mentioned the word election, and that leads me to want to speak to you for 6 or 7 hours about the upcoming election, who's in, who's out. What, of course, we know, it's the midterm election. It's the election in which the new president is usually given what Barack Obama once called a shellacking by voters seeking to redress the balance. Do you see that happening this year? And what role might Mr. Trump, who's not on the midterm ballot, play?
That's a very interesting question, James. A lot of Republicans across the country are out there trying to court the favor of Trump and his voters because they can read polls and they see that Trump is still very popular in the party. And so they're trying to do that. But yes, typically, as you mentioned, the first midterm elections following the election of a new president is usually not good for the president. And in this case, maybe even worse because Joe Biden's poll numbers are so bad right now. COVID continues to kind of rage, although fortunately not as strongly, not as deadly or seriously as before, and hopefully that'll fade soon. But I'm someone, James, who also believes what looks like the case today may not still be the case 9 or 10 months from now. So one thing we know in politics is the pendulum swings left and right, and it never stops swinging. Right now, chances are very good that Republicans are going to have a very good midterm election. But when you talk about the next presidential race in 2024, my goodness, that's a lifetime away, and anything can happen.
Do pendulums swing within parties? You've got other people in the Republican Party, like Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, former Governor Nikki Haley as well. Will they all just be waiting to see what Donald Trump does?
Yeah, I think so. And I wonder, especially with DeSantis, his popularity, I think, is growing a lot, James. And I wonder if he might not just go for it, even if Trump went for it too. It's going to be interesting.
And I was struck by, let's move back to the Democratic side, talking about pendulums. Yeah. So I was struck by some of the commentary about President Biden's speech in the Capitol. It's unusual for a president to speak there, but given the symbolism of what happened last year, that's clearly where Mr. Biden wanted to be. One commentator, a famous commentator, said this was the speech of the Biden presidency so far. How would you see it?
You know, I don't disagree with that. I thought it was really well delivered. I thought he, just in terms of pure delivery, not talking about the content, I thought he really delivered it in a passionate way, in a cohesive way. It's one of the best speeches I've ever seen him give, whatever he was talking about. Most of the content I could even agree with when he was, talking about Donald Trump's role. The problem with both what he said and Vice President Harris is when they start trying to connect January 6th to their favorite piece of legislation right now, which is a federal voting rights bill, and they want to make that connection. That's where they're going to lose a lot of people because they're obviously moving into the realm of politicking. Well, let's stick to January 6th and leave the legislation for another day.
We have another message.
Hi, I'm Scott Brooks from Dallas, Texas. As we reflect on the events of this day from last year, or of last year, it's important to understand the obvious, palpable anger many Americans felt then and feel even still today. From my point of view, Republican voters, like many independents and a growing number of Democrats, are witnessing now that complete breakdown of the very strides the country made under President Trump. Biden's presidency, along with the actions of Kamala Harris, has not only unified Republicans, it has made the appeal of Trump running for office again even more popular. All of us want energy independence, controlled borders, a strong military, a vibrant economy, and a society that at least has some sense of boundaries and decency. What happened on January the 6th, 2021 should not have happened. That's clear. That it did represent serious concerns and more and more people have come to feel a year later. There's no doubt that America is in need of great change many believe Trump still represents.
Is America also in need of the idea of one single set of facts for what happened last year, Gary?
That's always nice when it can happen, but Americans have disagreed on what the facts are long before Trump came along, contrary to popular criticism sometimes about Trump. I don't know a time when we all agreed from both sides, left and right, what even all the facts were. But an interesting point kind of raised there is trust, James. We need to trust election results. And frankly, this goes back also to, this isn't just one-sided. Ever since Trump was elected in 2016, we spent 4 years listening to his critics claim he was elected because of Russian collusion. It's the Russians who got Trump elected. Well, the Russians did not get Trump elected, and voter